The history of the Homo sapien is a long and fascinating tale of innovation and hardship. Our natural ability as a species to thrive on this earth has allowed us to achieve great feats that were once believed to be impossible. It is fascinating to see the innovations created by extraordinary engineers today, and it is interesting to look back at the roots of engineering to see how the very first engineers solved problems in simpler times. The wheel is arguably the most significant human invention. We see wheels every day in our modern lives. We use wheels to transport our cars and aircrafts. We use them in our computer hardware, to cut our pizzas, and to generate electricity. You may think that the wheel has greatly evolved since the very first wheel was invented due to modern technology. This isn't actually true, since the basic function of the wheel has remained unchanged, but advances in material science have enhanced the performance of the wheel for specific applications. It is hard for historians to pinpoint the exact time and location that the wheel was invented, but archaeologists have theorized how they believe the wheel was evolved based on the evidence that's been discovered. Even though there is no evidence to support the theory, it is speculated that before the wheel, people used large logs to roll objects across long distances. The first major advancement of the wheel started with the grinding stone. The grinding stone was used to grind grain into flour. Two grindstones called millstones each had a working face that were chiseled to have groove patterns. The patterns on the millstones work together to act as a pair of scissors to shear the grain as the top stone rotates above the stationary bottom stone. The top stone has a hole in the center to allow for grain to be fed in between the millstones. The wheat makes its way through the groove channels to the outside edge. The grinding stone allowed for grain to be converted into flour in large quantities, which meant that there was a greater need for containers to hold the flour. This demand led to the invention of the potter's wheel. The potter's wheel was invented by the Sumerians in the Bronze Age and then later refined by the Egyptians. The oldest evidence we have of the potter's wheel dates back to roughly 5,500 years ago. It was discovered in Mesopotamia and is considered to be the oldest archaeological evidence we have of the wheel. The use of the wheel for making pottery significantly reduced the time needed to make clay pots. The potter's wheel consisted of three main components: the axle, flywheel, and the wheel head. The wheel head was the work surface, while the axle's main purpose was to confine the assembly to one location. The key feature and primary force that allowed for the invention to perform was the use of the flywheel. An external force such as the kick of a foot is applied to give the potter's wheel enough momentum to achieve a high enough velocity for as long as possible, before resistance such as friction slow the work surface to an undesirable speed. The flywheel is a weighted element where the majority of the weight is around the circumference of the base, so that the wheel carries more kinetic energy and therefore the momentum keeps the base turning. The Sumerians were found to have the first archaeological evidence of wheeled transportation. Chariots pulled by oxen have been dated back to about 3000 BC. The first evidence of the spoke was found in Egypt and dates about 2000 BC. Iron was not found on wheels until about 1000 BC on Celtic chariots. Now let's look at how the wheel made everyday life easier in ancient civilizations. When a large object is pushed across the ground, it is hard to move because there is a lot of friction between the object's surface and the ground. When the same object is placed on a cart, it is easier to push. Unlike the friction experienced between the ground and the object's surface, there is much less resistance due to the fact that the only friction experienced by the cart is between the wheels, ground, and axle. The friction experienced by the wheels on the ground actually helps the wheel grip the ground to push forward. Wheels with an axle also work like a lever. The edge of the wheel travels a much greater distance than the axle does. This is important because this results in a greater force at the axle than the circumference of the wheel. So if you push the wheel at its circumference, the force is multiplied and a larger force is applied at the axle. This means that larger wheels make a longer lever, and therefore you get more leverage at the axle. Now when you apply a force at the axle of the wheel, the leverage is reversed and gets more force at the circumference of the wheel, and therefore you accelerate faster. Spokes were invented to enhance the performance of the wheel. Spokes are the rods that connect the axle to the rim of the wheel. Its main purpose is to transfer loads between the axle and the rim. Modern bikes use spokes that are situated in a pattern. This specific pattern distributes the load in such a way that the spoke that is on the ground experiences almost no load. This load distribution prevents premature failure of the wheel parts. The wheel transformed the way of life of early civilizations and greatly impacted modern life. The basic function of the wheel has remained unchanged, but advances in material science has enhanced the performance of the wheel for specific applications. We may not know exactly when someone had the idea to use the wheel for transportation, but whoever did revolutionized our way of life.